Kamisato Ayato, the mastermind behind the support at Tenshukaku, the bane of assassins, and the sibling who got the good genes, is the newest addition to the Genshin Impact roster. If you found yourself with a new watery warrior but don't know what he needs to be his best, you are in the right place. Because thanks to Hoyoverse, I was able to get early access to this dude and really get to thoroughly test him. So today in this video, I'm going to be teaching you everything you need to know about Kamisato Ayato, including his best weapons, artifacts, teams, and more. Before we get started, I just want to let you guys know that I go live a few days a week at twitch.tv/Braxophone. And I'm actually going to be live right after this video goes up with Ayato polls, so if you watch this video and you want to see some polls, definitely come on by. With all that being said, my name is Braxophone, and let's talk about Kamisato Ayato. Ayato's kit is one of the more straightforward ones of the newer units, even though it tries to be kinda complex. That being said, I'm gonna be super detailed so you understand everything. His elemental skill is a stance change, where for 6 seconds his normal attacks are converted to a quick slash of hydro damage over a decent area. These slashes count as normal attack damage, so artifacts and weapons that increase the damage of normal attacks are really strong here because they'll actually scale with the elemental skill. In total, he can slash 15 times in a window of his skill without attack speed buffs, but with attack speed buffs like Constellations 2, for example, he can actually get out more slashes in that 6-second window. Technically, unbuffed Ayato can reach 16 slashes, but it's pretty unrealistic and, to be honest, just a huge pain. There's a bunch of shenanigans with hit lag and latency, and I've only been able to replicate it one single time. Just assume 15. Every time Ayato hits an enemy with a slash from his skill, he gains 1 stack up to a maximum of 4. Each stack gives Ayato a damage bonus based on a portion of his HP, and the damage increase is really small overall, but it's a nice bonus. His first Ascension passive makes him start with 2 stacks right off the bat. Now again, the skill isn't really that complicated, it just really tries to be. You don't really have to think about stacks at all, they're just gonna happen automatically. During his elemental skill slashes, he can gain particles up to 3 times. It can either be 1 or 2 particles at a time, meaning you'll get between 3 and 6 particles every time you completely use up his skill. Hoyo really loves their RNG right now. Lastly, the cooldown is 12 seconds, but since it lasts for 6, it feels closer to 6 seconds. Oh, and he creates a water illusion of himself that blows up for AoE hydro damage, but in my experience, I don't even really notice it, and you probably won't notice it either. Ayato's burst is a lot more simple than his skill. He's going to create a large area that forms droplets that deal hydro damage to enemies, kind of similar to Ganyu's burst and how it drops icicles on them. The targeting on enemies seems random, but it's not actually random. Technically, the burst is going to target each enemy for a certain amount of hits, again similar to Ganyu's burst, regardless of their location or anything like that. They have a very small area, meaning that if you group enemies up, you'll be able to hit more droplets and more enemies. It costs 80 energy to use, which can be a pretty big problem for Ayato in some setups, and it also grants normal attack damage bonus to characters within the area and lasts 18 seconds with a 20-second cooldown. And also, just so you guys know, Ayato follows standard internal cooldown, meaning that only 1 in 3 hits, or 1 hit every 2.5 seconds, is actually going to apply hydro. Lastly, Ayato has a second passive that gives him 2 energy every second he's off field while he's below 40 energy in his bank. Honestly, this passive doesn't really do much, because if he's off field, you probably just used his burst anyways and are collecting particles from your support characters, and you'll be past 40 in a matter of seconds. Honestly, this should have been 40 to 80 instead of 0 to 40, but you know, just Hoyoverse things. When you're leveling Ayato, unless you're strictly using him as a support, you want to level his skill first, followed by his burst, and if you're going to level normals, you'll want to do those last. So now that you know how Ayato works, we can talk about his best build. So let's move on to weapons. There's a ton of extra math that goes into picking which weapon is Ayato's best in slot at any given time, and that's just because we have so many new artifact sets and so many new weapons in the game that it's getting much more complicated to say one is definitively the best. With that in mind though, I'm going to tell you guys which weapons are his best options in general and give you an idea of why they're good, rather than rank every single weapon individually. Starting off, in most scenarios, Haran, Ayato's signature weapon, is going to be his best in slot. The passive was actually made specifically for him, and there's not a lot of times it loses out to other weapons because it gives normal attack damage bonus. But if you have access to Jade Cutter and haven't pulled Haran, the damage potential of the two is actually nearly the same. Jade Cutter works really well with Ayato because it increases attack based on max HP, and it also passively increases the wielder's max HP, which pairs well with Ayato's HP scaling on his elemental skill. The cases are very few where Jade Cutter beats out Haran, but it can happen, and if you want to learn more about exactly how, feel free to check out the Ayato mains document in the description. Up next is Mist Splitter, which is Ayaka's signature weapon. It's not as good as Haran or Jade Cutter, but it's not really that far far off either. All three of these weapons are super close in damage potential overall. Other great options are Summit Shaper if you're not using a lot of attack buffs, Skyward Blade for the extra energy recharge that he needs as well as high stats, the Black Sword for normal attack bonus and crit, Lion's Roar and Electrocharge teams for extra damage bonus, Black Cliff Longsword for the stats, Amanoma for the solid energy generation and free-to-play accessibility, and Aquila Favonia. Worst case scenario, you can use the prototype ranker the game gives you for free if you haven't gotten far enough to unlock the Inazuma craftable. It has a high base attack and the passive procs off normal attacks, but in general, I wouldn't really recommend it. It should always be a worst case scenario, but if you don't have anything else, you can go ahead and use it. And Harbinger of Dawn is also good if you have a shield, but if you don't bother. Now, real quickly, there's two notes that I have to make, and these are pretty important. One is that Festering Desire doesn't really work well with Ayato because when you use this elemental skill, his biggest source of damage is going to be normal attacks and not actually elemental skill damage. The second thing is that Sacrificial Sword has the same issue. Now, you can activate Sacrificial Sword's passive with Ayato's illusion that he creates during his elemental skill, but the AoE on it is so small that it's not really worth going for. You're going to run into tons of issues with consistency if you try to use Sacrificial Sword just to get the extra slashes out of Ayato, and it's just not really worth the time. Anyways, guys, with that out of the way, let's move on to Ayato's artifacts. Before we get into the more complicated stuff, if you're below Adventurer rank 45, you shouldn't really be farming for anything specific because you won't be able to guarantee a 5-star artifact until AR 45. That being said, your best choice as a player below AR 45 is the Martial Artist set or the Berserker set because they're going to give you normal and charged attack damage bonus or crit rate depending on which set you go for, and both of them are pretty strong, and you can combine the two. But you really should prioritize having the right stats over sets first. So if you're below AR 45, I would go ahead and skip to the stats section from here. For folks above AR 45, the artifact set that has a higher damage ceiling will depend on the weapon that you're using. With that being said though, Ayato's super flexible with the set options and can deal solid damage even with 2-piece scraps. On screen now are 6 different 4-piece artifact sets that are strong on Ayato. Echoes of an Offering, Gladiator's Finale, Heart of the Depth, Emblem of Severed Fate, Thundering Fury, and Blizzard Strayer are all solid picks for different situations. Technically speaking, Echoes is his best in slot option, but whether or not it outdamages other options is really reliant on RNG, since the set's 4-piece effect will only activate on some hits, and you can't control which ones. If you couple that with the fact that it's a completely new set and that you would need to farm a whole 4 pieces for it, I actually don't recommend going for Echoes if you already have a solid Heart of the Depths set. The thing with Heart of the Depths is that its damage is nearly unconditional. You're going to be getting 30% more normal and charged attack damage just for casting an elemental skill, and 15% hydro damage just for having the 2-piece set on. With this set, you don't have to worry about RNG at all. On top of that, the pieces for Heart of the Depths share with the Blizzard Strayer domain, meaning that you'll be getting pieces for 2 solid sets if you go farm it. You could go with Gladiators if you don't have either set. The 4-piece actually will increase his normal attack damage while you're using his elemental skill, but for overall damage, Heart of the Depth is what I recommend if you don't want to spend time in the Echoes domain. As far as Gladiator, that should be a last resort for you in terms of normal attack damage, and Emblem, Thundering Fury, and Blizzard Strayer are only sets that you should use if you really know what you're doing. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. In general though, Echoes is sometimes best in slot. I just highly recommend Heart of the Depths for consistency. While you're waiting or currently farming, you can use 2 pieces of an attack percent set and 2 pieces of a Heart of the Depth set in different combinations. Though Ayato has tons of sets you can use for him, his stats are really consistent. If you're below AR 45, then you should just go for an attack percent Sands, attack percent or hydro damage Goblet, and an attack percent Circlet. To get the most damage out of your Ayato above AR 45 though, you're going to want to run an attack percent Sands, a hydro damage Goblet, and a crit rate or crit damage Circlet. When you're deciding on which crit piece to go for, you should be looking at a total of at least 40 crit rate and 80 crit damage because you want to have a 1-to-2 balance to maximize your damage. Real quick before I move on to the team section, the reason you don't run an HP Sands is because the value you get from his elemental skill with HP scaling isn't big enough to get you more damage than an attack Sands. The HP bonus should be considered an extra thing, not the standard. As far as an energy recharge Sands goes, the only time you'd want to run it is if you're using Ayato as a support with 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate. Otherwise, you're going to want to stick to attack percent. As far as energy recharge goes, I've been playing Ayato at 150% and 180% energy recharge, and in my personal experience, I found 150% to be more than enough. If your team doesn't generate a lot of particles though, you may actually need more, and you can adjust as you feel necessary. For substats, prioritize energy recharge up to 150%, then focus on crit rate and damage. Attack percent and elemental mastery are also good, but make sure that you do your best to get close to 150 energy recharge first. Something that I mentioned in my Ayato review is that so far, Ayato hasn't introduced a ton of new teams into the game, but he's sort of a side grade for already established teams. For example, let's talk about the Taser comp. Taser is a team typically featuring Sucrose, Xingqiu, Beidou, and Fischl, but in this version, you're actually going to be replacing Xingqiu with Ayato. The idea is that in this variant, you can deal higher hydro damage against multiple enemies and quickly enable Beidou's burst to activate and bounce off enemies. Typically, players will run Sucrose with an elemental mastery weapon and have her deal the bulk of the damage, but in this case, you can give her Thrilling Tales to buff your Beidou and let Ayato drive the reactions. You can also replace Sucrose with Venti, and the team absolutely mows through enemies because Ayato's slashes can reach Venti's burst, and Ayato's burst has quadratic scaling if you're in Venti burst like Ganyu. If you infuse Venti burst with Hydro, you can get a 15 energy refund to Ayato and also cause electrocharged reactions to be based off of Venti's elemental mastery, not just Beidou and Fischl's. This team is super solid. It carried me through multiple Abyss runs when I was testing Ayato out, and I'd highly recommend you try it if you have the tools. Now, the next team that I want to showcase is a Permafreeze team. It works with cryo damage dealers like Ayaka, Ganyu, and Rosaria, but because I don't have Ayaka on this account, I replaced her with Rosaria for the time being. My favorite version of this team is Ayato, Ayaka, Venti, and Diona, but you can also replace Diona with Ganyu for off-field cryo damage, or you can replace Venti with Kazuha or Sucrose. There's a ton of flexibility in this team. You just need to have high off-field cryo damage, a resistance shredding animal unit, and a built Ayato. With Ayaka, you can use her burst combined with Ayato's elemental skill to keep enemies frozen in place while her burst shreds through them, and it's a really awesome combo. It feels super solid to play, and there's no way enemies are unfreezing in this combo. This team also allows Ayato to use 4 Blizzard Strayer if that's something you want to do. The third team I want to showcase really quickly is going to be a Yoimiya dual carry team. Now, let me first start off by saying this is not a meta team at all. I found that it works and can clear Abyss with 36 stars in my account, but it's not going to have as easy of a time as something like Taser or National, but it's fun, so here it is. Yoimiya, Ayato, Xingqiu, and a Flex are what you want to run for this one, and for me, I like to run Yunjin, but you are pretty squishy with both Yoimiya and Ayato since both of them don't really like to move. The idea behind this team is that with Xingqiu and Ayato, even with Yoimiya's burst up, you don't have much of a problem vaporizing Yoimiya's shots, and Ayato's burst will buff Yoimiya's normal attack damage as well. Xingqiu will also generate lots of Hydro particles, and with double Hydro, you get a healing bonus from Xingqiu. The reason it's a dual carry comp though is because Ayato is still built for damage here. In a scenario with lots of enemies where Yoimiya wouldn't be as effective, Ayato's personal damage would be since he can hit a lot of enemies at once. But in scenarios where you just have one target, using Yoimiya would actually benefit you more. I use Yunjin since she can buff Ayato and Yoimiya a ton, but you can use someone like Venti, Kazuha, Bennett, Fischl, or Zhongli. Again, this isn't really a meta team, but it's one that I've just had a lot of fun with and that you guys might have fun with too. So you know how I mentioned that attack speed actually buffs the amount of slashes you get per instance with Ayato? Well, when I tried an attack speed buffing team, it was super fun to play, but I didn't find that it was super effective. You have to dedicate a ton of time to getting the attack speed buffs from your team just to use one 6-second ability, and overall the investment into Ayato isn't really worth it. That being said, attack speed definitely isn't a detriment, it's just not super effective to focus a whole team around giving attack speed to one character. For reference, the team I tried was Ayato, Rosaria, C6 Chongyun with Song of Broken Pines, and C2 Jean. The team is definitely fun, just don't expect it to beat out other meta teams. Lastly, before we move on, I know it's strange that there wasn't a team that features Xiangling. It is weird that a Hydro unit wasn't inevitably paired with such a strong free-to-play Pyro carry. Now, the thing is that due to Ayato's internal cooldown on his skill and burst, he's not able to apply Hydro consistently enough to be a driver for Xiangling and have her vaporize every hit. The reason Child works is because this Riptide Hydro application doesn't have an internal cooldown, but with Ayato, it's a mixed bag who's going to actually end up vaporizing. And the main issue with this is that when Ayato is the one vaporizing, it ends up being less damage than if Xiangling were to vaporize. That's not to say you can't run them together, but it's just not as good as pairing Xiangling with Xingqiu or Child. Before we wrap up, if you're an Ayato wanter or haver, you probably want to know if it's worth going for Constellations, or at least how much stronger he becomes with them. So real quick, I'm going to go over his Constellations and how good they are. His first Constellation increases the damage of his elemental skill normal attacks by 40% against enemies below half health. It seems like a really solid improvement, and it definitely is a damage increase, but when enemies are below 50% HP already, the value of this is already diminishing since they're close to being defeated anyways. That being said, it's an okay Constellation. Ayato's second Constellation makes it so that his elemental skill now maxes out stacks at 5 instead of 4, and his HP gets increased by 50% when he has 3 stacks. The HP difference is really what gives Ayato such a damage spike from this constellation. It's nothing broken, but it definitely improves his damage more than C1. Constellation 3 increases his elemental skill level by 3, which is actually the biggest damage increase of all of his constellations. Constellation 4 gives characters a 15% attack speed buff for 15 seconds when you use his elemental burst. This constellation doesn't just benefit him, it benefits anyone that you would play as a normal attack carry. Now, I love this constellation personally, but it requires you to pull Ayato 5 times, so I really don't recommend it. Constellation 5 increases his burst level by 3, which ends up being a very small damage increase, but also increases the normal attack damage bonus from his burst. And lastly, his Constellation 6 makes it so that when you use his elemental skill, the next single normal attack that you use will create an extra 2 Hydro Slashes that deal damage based off of Ayato's attack. The amount of attack that it uses is a lot, and it totals 900%, but it is only active once per use of his skill, so just make sure to keep that in mind. Full transparency, I wasn't able to test his C6 with the Echo set in the time that I had, but when I do test it on a friend's account after Ayato's official release, I'll make sure to confirm whether or not those hits are able to proc the Echo set effect and gain a huge amount of damage in the pinned comment below. Overall, Ayato's constellations are a pretty solid upgrade when you add them all up. Based on damage calculations, you're going to see anywhere from a 75% to a 90% damage increase at C6, which is pretty significant. However, I always have a hard time recommending constellations, and Ayato's not really an exception. His real power spike isn't until Constellation 2 and 3 like Raiden, and it also isn't as high as Raiden's either. I wouldn't go for constellations on Ayato unless you have money to burn, or you just have a thing for families with big foreheads. If you're here, that means one of two things. One, you skipped a portion of this video to see if I summarized everything, or two, you just graduated from the school of Kamisato Ayato. If you made it this far, let me know if you plan on pulling for Ayato in the comments. If you want my full review on Ayato, that's live right now as well, and the link's gonna be in the description. In that video, I go in depth on what I like and dislike about the character, and give my opinion on if he's worth the pull. In general though, I feel like Ayato is pretty balanced. Unlike many other Inazuma units, he's not a strict downgrade, and is more of a side grade, a character that you can pull for and play if you like him without missing out on too much damage in top teams. One of the best things about Ayato is that he's so friendly to free-to-play accounts, since he works amazingly well in Taser and can take full advantage of craftable weapons. He pairs well with a lot of characters and also just feels really powerful to play. With the right build and team, Ayato can be a force to be reckoned with. Anyways, thanks for watching everyone. If you've enjoyed, I'd greatly appreciate if you'd leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to check out more of my content, I'm live on Twitch a few days a week and when Ayato drops. Thanks again everyone, and I'll catch you next time.